Good evening and welcome to each of you. We are excited to present this webinar on media relations and crisis management. This is the first in a series of webinars that National PTA's communications team will be presenting this year for PTA leaders across the country on areas within communications. Thank you for taking the time to join the webinar. I am Heidi Mae Wilson, and I manage media relations for National PTA. I'm thrilled to be joined this evening by two journalism and public relations experts who will share their insights, advice, and tips throughout the webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce Carla Schoon-Reed, a veteran freelance writer and education journalist. Carla has written about family engagement and the ways families are shaping the future of America's public schools for Education Week. She also has served as an education correspondent for EdSource in California and wrote stories about schools and universities for the Tallahassee Democrat in Florida and the Cincinnati Enquirer in Ohio. Additionally, Carla has worked with the National School Boards Association and the Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District. Her specialties include K-12 education, urban education, racial and gender diversity issues, and media relations. Carla currently works as a special project manager for advancement communications at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I'm also pleased to introduce Leslie Bruinton. Leslie is the public relations coordinator for the Tuscaloosa City Schools in Alabama, where she oversees internal and external communications for a system of more than 10,000 students and 1,300 employees. Following the devastating tornadoes in her area in April 2011, in which 3 schools in her system were damaged, Leslie implemented a social media strategy on the fly since the system website, email, and all other forms of communications were down. Within 30 minutes of her call for volunteers, 80 people showed up to help aid in disaster relief. As a former television reporter who consistently integrates traditional and new media, she works to keep active communication between parents, teachers, students, and community stakeholders within the school system. Welcome, Carla and Leslie, and thanks very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
During this evening's webinar, we will provide an overview of media relations, including tips for working proactively with the media and building relationships with members of the media. We also will discuss the need at times to work reactively with the media and the importance of crisis management and planning before a crisis arises. Additionally, we will share tips for preparing and participating in media interviews during a crisis or anytime, as well as best practices for utilizing social media. At the end of the webinar, we will answer any questions. Please feel free throughout the webinar to type your questions in the chat box on the right side of the screen. We will begin the webinar with a discussion on working with the media. Working with the media is an important way to raise awareness and build support for PTA and PTA programs and activities among external audiences, including elected officials, business and community leaders, and the general public. It is essential that PTAs work proactively with the media. An important first step is to research media outlets and reporters in your area and identify the most appropriate people to receive your information. Reviewing websites for media outlets is one way to see what topics they cover and who covers what topics. Reading your local newspaper and watching your local news are other ways to identify who would be best to receive your information. Ideally, you want to reach a contact who reports on education or who covers children and families. Most contact information can be found on the internet or by calling the newsroom, and it's important to compile names, email addresses, and phone numbers. Another important aspect to working with the media is building relationships with members of the media. Reporters are always looking for good stories and helpful contacts at the grassroots level. Email is a good first approach to contact members of the media, and it is okay to follow up with a phone call. And it's important to continue to nourish relationships even when there isn't news to share. Building relationships with members of the media will help in securing positive coverage of PTA and raising awareness of the important role the association plays in making a difference for children and families and helping communities grow and prosper. I would now like to turn it over to Carla to share tips, best practices, and advice from her perspective as a journalist for working with the media and building relationships with members of the media.
Well, one thing I would advise your members is to really look at customizing your story pitch to your news outlet. So once you've done the research that Heidi mentioned about your news outlet, really look at, is this a news outlet that basically you can write your own news story and submit it with photos and present that story already done, because some community newspapers do that, or is it an outlet that you need to put together a formal press release where they're going to want to know the who, what, where, when, why, how, and a good contact number if it's an event. Also, you want to make sure that you consider pitching stories that have a local angle to a national story of significance. So the upcoming presidential elections, usually schools will have a student vote. And since it's somewhat controversial, it might be interesting, and you can talk about the civics, importance of civics instruction, and really get some coverage for your school. Another approach you should look at is pitching your story in writing, and that may be just for yourself, so that makes sure that you've got all the angles of your story covered. You don't want to get blindsided in an interview. For example, if you've got parents who are opposed to a certain novel being taught in the classroom, you really want to make sure that you've read that novel and you talk about what passages you may find offensive or not offensive. So basically being a good student of knowing what you're covering, what the story that you're pitching, and understanding all the different angles involved. Also, if it's an issue and not an event that your parents are going to be commenting on, make sure you have parents who are actually experiencing the situation. So if you're talking about testing at your school, make sure you've got parents whose students are being tested in the particular grades that you are talking about. Heidi did also talk about having a good relationship with the media when you don't have a story going on. Something that I always found interesting was parents who would just reach out to me to kind of give me an update on where a story was going, because I couldn't cover every single angle of a developing case or story or an issue with a school board, because that way I was more informed once I had to write a full story. So basically keeping your local media informed of the twists and turns of a story without knowing that they're not going to be able to write a story every single time you contact them. And then also I would really advise that you don't forget about letters to the editor, the comment sections to blogs, reaching out to columnists and editorials, because that is a way that you can get media attention for your issue, your event, because a lot of times those comment sections are some of the most well-read and well-viewed areas of any kind of media outlet.
Thank you so much, Carla.
You're welcome.
So in addition to working proactively with the media, at times it also is necessary for PTAs to work reactively with the media. Assessing potential vulnerabilities and knowing how you will respond when such situations arise is critical to react quickly, effectively, and confidently and maintain your PTA's reputation. It's important to begin by assessing situations that have the potential to create reputational risks. For example, some PTAs have faced situations of embezzlement that have received inquiries from the media. When developing a crisis management and communications plan, it's important to determine who will be involved in executing the plan. So this may include PTA officers, members of your board, school administrators. It's also important to identify who will do what. So who will be responsible for media relations, social media, internal communications to PTA leadership, members, and partners. Knowing in advance who is responsible for what will ensure a timely and effective response. It also is essential to know how you will respond and what you will do. Not all situations will require a statement or response to the media. Some may just include internal communications within leadership and to members. And finally, it is critical to know what you will say. Delivering clear messages and offering positive positioning is paramount. I'd like to turn it over now to Leslie to share tips, best practices, and advice from her perspective on building a plan, responding to situations, and the importance of collaborating with school and district public relations professionals and leaders to work collaboratively during a crisis and all the time. Leslie?
I think it's really important for PTA leaders to realize that not only do you have the opportunity and the responsibility to take those positions on behalf of your organization, but you can also assist your schools. And as you know, PTA is a great support system and a foundational portion of a school and how it connects with stakeholders. If your school is not asking you to be a part of its communications plan, there's no reason why you can't volunteer. Because many of our PTA leaders are already asking principals, how can we help? What do you need? What can we do more to support the schools? So not only while you may have position points, position statements on behalf of your organization, your association, you may be able to assist and to provide a third-party endorsement to your schools as they're facing a challenge or a crisis point. So I want to encourage each of you to be able to ace any kind of media interviews you have. And so ACE, this is an acronym. A, acknowledge the issue, whether it's a crisis, a problem, or uncertainty. C, show compassion. E, explain how you're resolving that issue, whether it's a crisis or a problem or uncertainty. And as we go through our webinar tonight, you'll see some tactics for doing that. But one of the things that lots of people are very concerned about when they are faced with an inquiry from the media is, how do I respond? The easiest way to respond is to use that approach, ACE. You're going to acknowledge whatever the issue is, whether it's a financial mismanagement issue, whether it's an issue regarding some success for students, or if it's a tragedy. You're going to acknowledge this is what has happened. You know, our hearts are and our prayers and thoughts are with the families of those impacted, and here's what we're doing to assist during this time of need. That's a really great practice for how you can address those challenges and issues that you may have to respond to as a member of the media has called and sought advice or sought feedback from you. Touching off of what Heidi May said, you know, it's really important to kind of scope out your key messages and your position statements before the crisis hits. So kind of think about, in my job as a public relations practitioner, I guess I think of worst case scenarios. What's the worst thing that could happen here? It's not something that we like to think about, working with schools and being connected with schools and families, but as a public relations practitioner, I need to keep an eye out for what may be around the corner so that I can have a response just in case something happens. And I encourage those of you that are operating in that public relations function within your associations to start thinking about those issues. If there's some touch point issues in your community, whether it's with schools or school choice opportunities or funding, or whether it's referendum issues related to school funding, any kind of issues you may have, you never know where you may be asked for an opinion. And so you want to be ready. And that's a great opportunity to implement some of the tactics that Heidi May will talk to you about in just a few moments. When you're asked your opinion, you always have an opportunity to redirect back to whatever key messages you have you've developed. And that tactic is called bridging, and Heidi May will explain that a little bit more in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Leslie. And to piggyback a bit on how Leslie was talking about key messages and message development, one of the most important steps is to prepare key messages, and especially those that offer positive positioning. It's important to know PTA's goals, our programs, positions, public policy priorities, and activities on the local, state, as well as national levels. And it's critical to craft core messages that will be communicated across all channels and to ensure that internal and external messages are consistent. And like Leslie was alluding to, it's important to think about what you, as you're preparing your messages, what would you want the headline to be if you could control what that headline would be? If you don't want to read it in the paper or see it on TV or even in social media, don't say it. They can't write it or report it or put it out there if you don't say it. And it's important to prepare answers to questions that you expect, but especially those that you fear the most. So you're ready and have your messaging ready to go when you need to use it for those sorts of questions. And I like to just share this slide and this graphic as a visual demonstration of the importance of ensuring that all messages are consistent and aligned throughout the life of a crisis or a situation through your internal and your external communications. And then I'll just turn it back, Leslie, if there's anything else that you might want to add about message development or working with school and district public relations professionals. I know you talked a little bit about getting involved in state public relations associations, so if there might be anything you might want to share in regard to that.
I am a member of the National School Public Relations Association. We refer to that as NSPRA, so if you ever hear anyone talking about that, that's what we're talking about. And many of the states have what we kind of call SPRAs, S-P-R-As. So those are School Public Relations Association. I'm delighted to be this year's president for the Alabama School Public Relations Association. Our association, like many others around the nation, offer associate memberships at a reduced fee. I know for hours, I think it's $25 if you want to come in. So, you know, a lot of our PTAs may not have access to dedicated school public relations practitioners, but there's no reason why you could not apply for membership into your state's association. Usually they meet quarterly, depending on if it's a larger state, they may meet monthly. Even if you can't attend meetings, it's a great resource. I've had new members contact me, smaller school systems who don't have a dedicated school PR point of contact, who've called and said, we've just had this crisis involving a school bus. How do we respond? What's our next step? And what I really find is the congeniality that happens in this association that you can bounce things off of. You know, I've been practicing school public relations for about 7 or 8 years now, and before that I had 7 or 8 years in television news. And so I've had quite a career in communications field, but I was faced with a challenge here recently about a month ago, and I reached out to another colleague in another school system that's a part of our Alabama School Public Relations Association, said, hey, this is what I'm thinking and how we should respond to this issue. Can I bounce this idea off of you? What do you think? And they were able to give me some other feedback. So joining as an affiliate or an associate member of your state school public relations association may be an opportunity for you guys to learn more, connect with others, and to have someone that you can kind of bounce ideas off of as you're strategizing.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that those associations often also provide webinars and trainings and resources and tips, and so some of that may be helpful as well, being a part of those sorts of associations. So in addition to the importance of assessing potential situations, developing your plan, preparing your key messages, it is essential to prepare for media interviews. It's one of the most important aspects to working with the media, especially during a crisis, but really at any time that you might be working with the media. By being prepared, you can help shape a story that is written and ensure that you are confident during the interview. So if a reporter calls you directly and you're not prepared to answer his or her questions, it's okay that you say, actually, I'm in the middle of something right now, but I'd be happy to call you back. When is your deadline? This would give you some time that you can review your key messages, prepare yourself, and ensure that you're ready when the interview does happen. There's some important questions to ask before an interview to help you prepare, and some of those include, what is the story about, and what does the reporter hope to learn from our association? What is the deadline? Who else maybe is being interviewed? How long will the interview take? If it is for radio or TV, will the interview be live or will it be taped? What materials could we provide that would be helpful? And in addition to this, there are a number of points to keep in mind during an interview to help control and shape a story and ensure that it is positive for your PTA. Some do's: it's important to speak simply and clearly, to talk about what you know, use your key messages, tell the truth and stick just to the facts, correct mistakes, and focus on the positive. It is important never to go off the record, not to say no comment, to be defensive, to over-explain, to speculate what ifs or what if this, and sort of look forward to the future. You don't want to share your personal opinion and let them get to you or be emotional. So if it is a situation such as an embezzlement or something that is involving an investigation, it's critical that you do not comment on the investigation details and leave those to the police. One technique that Leslie alluded to just a short while ago is the bridging technique, and this is a great technique to use during an interview, especially one that might involve a crisis situation. So it's important to know that you're not obligated to answer all questions, and you can use the bridging technique to transition difficult questions by bridging to your key messages. So some transitions that you could use if you're given a difficult question, that speaks to and then touch on one of your key message points. Or it's important that you also know and again touch on one of your key message points. What's important to remember is and hit one of your key messages. While I can't speak to that, what I can tell you is and hit another one of your key messages. Bridging is a good way to answer negative questions with positives and to touch on your key messages, reinforce those key messages, and a great technique that you can use, especially during a crisis, but really any time that you are doing a media interview. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Carla to share her tips and advice from her perspective on preparing for media interviews and things to keep in mind during an interview.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that we're not all scary journalists. I think that there's there's a big fear factor when it comes to talking to journalists. But I think you'd have to realize that most of us all come from a positive place. We're trying to do our jobs as much as you're trying to be a parent. You're trying to represent the PTA. So don't assume that the reporter has some sort of hidden agenda, some ulterior motive right from the start. So that way we're both coming from a positive position. One way you can do that as well is ask for the reporter to send you the questions in advance. If they're not on a tight deadline, and because we have email, social media, even texting, we can send you those email those questions to you in advance so that you can be prepared, and then also you can get a better understanding of how the reporter is trying to cover the issue. Most often they're trying to understand all different parts of the issue. They're probably talking to parents on both sides of an issue if it's about a school closing or a contentious curriculum issue. They're really just trying to get a parent on one side and a parent on the other side. They're trying to have voices from both sides. So that's usually what the reporter is looking for. Feel free to explain your point, but be sure to have a concise statement that you can repeat, because most reporters are on tight deadlines and they will not have the time to speak with you at length. If you're talking with television or radio reporters, also they'll have limited airtime to be able to include your comments. So a very long anecdote is really not, they're not going to have the airtime to do that. But if you have a short statement that you can repeat and be confident about it, such as, we do not believe the superintendent has the authority to make this decision, period, point blank. That way you get your point across. Prepare talking points, have statistics and or facts to back up your opinion. You want to steer clear of any kind of characterizations of people's personalities, if at all possible, so that you can have just stay clear with the facts and statistics. Some reporters will ask you just to respond via email, so that way you will also have an electronic record of your statement. So that's an easy way to kind of control the interview with the reporter. If you want to say, I don't have time to talk to you by phone, but can I answer your questions by email? A lot of reporters will go ahead and do that with you. If you can't comment or you prefer not to comment on an issue or a problem, consider telling the reporter why, and this is what I would advocate. You know, this is the first time I've learned about this situation, so I do not feel comfortable speaking about it at this time. It really does speak to the issue. You're not using the word no comment, which sometimes people can characterize as something, it leaves a lot of questions in people's minds. But if you just explain that you don't know anything about the situation right now, you're just learning about it, the reporter will understand, and they may quote you as just saying that, and that's all they can quote. Let's say it's something about a union contract dispute, teacher union contract dispute. You can say the PTA has decided not to take an official position on this issue at this time. We hope our school district officials and teachers will reach a resolution soon, and just leave it at that. So then that way you're not taking sides, but you're just advocating that you want the best for your children, and that's it. If you know you are not the right person to speak about a particular issue, you might want to try to find somebody who will. And this is why I say this, and I would really advocate for this. You know your community better than the media representative, especially if it's somebody coming from the outside. The media often will have to find anybody who's willing to talk to them. So if you want the story done accurately and correctly, try to find somebody with the facts and the willingness to share those details with the reporter. So then that way the story is told accurately, and it's just not somebody on the street who sort of knows something but really is not the right person to talk to about that situation. Another issue is I would say if you're doing TV, you want to make sure that you look presentable so that you're not distracting from your message. Unfortunately, people look at the visual and they won't listen to what you're saying if you aren't presentable on screen. So those are my tips, Heidi.
Thank you, Carla. Appreciate you sharing those with our audience. So in addition to the media, now with social media, a situation can unfold in a matter of moments. So it's important to think about social media and how you will utilize this during a crisis, but also all the time as well. So while a situation can unfold quickly with social media, at the same time, it provides great opportunities to reach audiences in real time with your key messages and your resources. It's also a great way to engage directly with your audiences and to mobilize supporters, and it is a way to increase your visibility. Given that a situation can now unfold in a matter of moments through social media, it is important that you're monitoring your social media channels for potentially damaging news and/or criticism. When using social media, particularly during a crisis, it is essential to think about who you are trying to reach, which platforms they use, what format will work best for your goals, and the best way to engage with your audience. And it is critical to include in your crisis plan how you will use social media and how you will respond in this space. I'm going to turn it back over now to Carla to share her perspective on social media and also share a bit about how members of the media are using social media.
Well, the explosion of social media really has changed the landscape of reporting, I believe. As recently when I was blogging for Education Week, you could go and search Facebook pages of different organizations and contact people through their Facebook pages, through Twitter. It really has expanded how we can reach people for our stories. But also realize that the media will pull quotes from those social media outlets. So if there's something on if you have a Facebook page for your PTA, you want to monitor those comments that are coming through there, because if there is a dialogue about this issue, if you can monitor the comments in some way, you might want to take a look at that. Same with the photos, because they can pull photos, quotes, contact people through all the social media. But a positive side is that the media also can send out blanket requests for parents' comments versus via social media. And often you can be part of a story and advocate for your position or advocate for your school in a way that a lot of times you wouldn't be able to, because it's so difficult to try to find parents sometimes if you're not clued into that community. So if it's a national story, if you have some sort of already social media presence, it's a lot easier to be that face for your school, be that advocate for your school and your community if you've already got a presence out there. And then also be reporters yourself. Media outlets are shrinking their staff, so you want to get your own story out there on social media. And sometimes those stories are picked up nationally. So, you know, national media outlets, statewide media outlets, they will look through social media and try to see what's trending. So you want to learn how to craft your message to garner more views, likes, shares, tweets, so that you can get that message out there and advocate your position or promote your event.
Thank you, Carla.
You're welcome.
Now we'll turn it over to Leslie to share how schools and districts are using social media, particularly during a crisis situation, and tips and advice to keep in mind for using social media. She effectively used social media during the tornado situation in Alabama, so I'd love to turn it over to her to share her thoughts and advice as well.
Well, the reason our school system got on social media in 2011 is because when the storms hit, it wiped out our communications channels. That included phone and our website. So the primary ways that we would be contacting families to let them know what was going on were not available to us. And I recall the newspaper article that I had read that talked about different demographics and who is on social media, and I saw a correlation between the statistics pointed out there and our parents in that population. So I advocated for us to move on to social media, which at that point in time, it was beyond the firewall. Couldn't access it. And it is really a good channel of communication for us. I think in the past, going on 5 years now, we've really developed a very robust social media presence. We started on Facebook because that's mostly what people were on in 2011, and we had a Twitter account, but Twitter didn't really expand until a couple of years later. And so what I find is that Facebook for the Tuscaloosa City School System is a great way to connect with parents. We can share updates about meetings, we can share pictures, we can share event pages, those types of things. That's how I use Facebook. How we use Twitter is a little bit different. The majority of our followers on Twitter are our students. They're mostly high school students, members of the media, and businesses. So I find that in times of crisis, and we are in a severe weather period, as a matter of fact, tonight, so we canceled all of our extended day opportunities after school today. And so I noticed that every time that we're in a severe weather mode, people know to turn to our social media channels to find out what's going on. I can pretty much guarantee that we're going to see an uptick in the number of fans or followers that we have. But what's really amazing is the number of retweets and shares that we have on Facebook as a result of the information we communicate. And if you're really wonky about this kind of stuff, if you look at the analytics, you'll start seeing how much engagement did you have with your fans or followers on a particular message that you issued. Now, if it's something like a groundbreaking or a tree planting, students are building an outdoor classroom, I may have a few, but I don't get nearly the type of engagement as I get when we have severe weather coverage. That's a great opportunity for you. It presents a really good opportunity is once these people connect with you in social media in this space, then you can keep engaging them. And the key is that once you've got their attention as a result of a high interest event, could be severe weather as it usually is in our case, you can keep engaging these audiences on meeting messages, the positives of your school system, or in your case your association, and how you're connecting with families. So I don't advocate for not really having a strategy for social media. I mean, if you have the time, and we didn't, but we were able to implement one on the fly because it was necessary, what was required, and what was needed to connect with stakeholders at that time. So think about why you want to be on social media, what kinds of goals you would like to meet, And what's your purpose for being on there? Are you a message board? Are you a way to connect and share content back and forth across the platform with your fans and followers? What's your point for being on social media? I think most entities that started on social media 5 years ago, 7 years ago were a little fuzzy about who they were and what their online persona may be. But you'll find that over time it develops. And so maybe you have a fun persona. Maybe you have a super serious and always formal persona. That's okay. Organizations can have personalities too, and it's a great way to engage with your stakeholders. I know that our stakeholders do trust our social media channels, and so a lot of times I find that reporters are just going immediately from our social media channels to air. One final point that I'll pull out is that if you're on Twitter and you notice certain entities have that little blue check mark, that means that Twitter has verified them as being an official account and not a spoof account. And the reason that I bring this up, I've had fellow public relations practitioners that were the victims of spoof accounts, where students would go and set up dummy accounts in the name of a school system and issue school closure messages. And so that little blue check mark is a way that you can kind of be verified by Twitter and safeguard against that. It's also a point that you can educate the people who are following you on that you are the official organization, that Twitter or Facebook has verified you as being such, and this is the channel of communication that you will be pushing out those messages. So you can look into that. As a matter of fact, if INSPRA has a social media blog, and I believe the post is called That Little Blue Check. So if you go on to INSPRA's social media blog, the National School Public Relations Association social media blog, you should be able to search for that post called That Little Blue Check.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you to Carla as well for sharing your insights and advice when it comes to the use of social media, not only during a crisis situation, but all the time. And Leslie touched on some of the resources that are available through NSPRA. National PTA also has a number of communications resources that are available and free for you to use to assist you in your communications efforts. Our Back to School Kit, which can be accessed at ptakit.org. That has tips and best practices for working with the media. There are tips for social media and sample social media policies, as well as other tips for communicating with fellow PTA members, school staff, administrators, and community members. Additionally, the Advocacy Toolkit, which is available on our website at pta.org/advocacy toolkit, and that also includes some tips for media relations and working with the media and other great resources, particularly for advocacy as well. And then our news releases and media statements are also available on our website at pta.org/news releases. And there you'll find all of the press releases, statements, media advisories, and that we issue, which might be helpful for messaging on certain issue areas and topics as it relates to education, children, and families, and kind of how we are positioning things at national PTA that might be helpful to you as you might be positioning those at the state level and then sharing them with your members as well. So please know that those resources are available to you at any time, and also the resources that Leslie mentioned through NSPRA. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Carla to share any final thoughts, tips, best practices, or advice that she may have on just overall working with the media, crisis communications, preparing for interviews. Any final thoughts and advice that you might want to share?
I guess one of my final thoughts I would like to share would be about, I wouldn't want you guys to wait for a crisis to be prepared. You really want to be prepared in advance of anything happening. We've seen the news. It can happen in any community, whatever the crisis might be. You want to be prepared in advance. And some of that also comes with be proactive about the how you want your school and community to be portrayed out in the media. So I would advise that your PTAs look at greatschools.org. People are already reviewing your schools. Is that the face that you want out there? You want to see what are people saying about your school. Make sure you pipe in and advocate for your school, because reporters will look at everything from Facebook pages to greatschools.org to Twitter accounts to see what people are saying about your school if there's a crisis situation, in order to characterize your community and your school. So because in that short period of time, the media has a short period of time, they're going to just grab what they can get. So you want to make sure that you're out front and you have that image out there of what your community really is about. Another thing, for sensitive issues, I would advocate that you designate one key person to speak on behalf of your group and organization, and then offer others to help provide examples to clarify that position. That way you have a unified voice, a unified message, and that person can really steer the media to the position that you want out there for the public to understand where you're coming from. So I would really advocate that you have just designate one person to be the key person, and then if they're asking for more people, then if you feel comfortable, make sure those people are on message as well. Also really know your media outlets. There's so many. There are bloggers, there's columnists. Understand where they're coming from, what needs that they have in order to fulfill their jobs as media representatives. Do they have a column that they have to do every week about schools? Then you know that you can go to them. Bloggers are more on the fly, so you can send them things very quickly and they will produce it faster. So really get to know who in your community is covering the schools and who would be willing to be an ally or an advocate for whatever message that you're trying to get out there, or whatever event that you're trying to promote.
Great. Thank you, Carla. And Leslie, if you have any final thoughts or insights or advice that you might want to share?
I think that the information that we've presented tonight stands not just for crisis communication, but just good school PR. And the thing about that is that, I challenge each of you when you're trying to figure these things out. What outcomes do you want to have? Carla pointed this out, that you should never go into any kind of issue or incident without trying to figure out what are your outcomes. What do you want to have happen? And the best case scenario of this issue, for positive or negative, what do you want to have happen? Do you want to find new people to become a part of your association? Do you need people to come and volunteer? Do you need to put drops in the bucket for good news to kind of blunt any bad news that may be out there? And so all of the tactics that you have at your disposal in public relations should be deployed as needed. You don't always have to use every one of them at the same time. So Heidi May talked about this earlier, where sometimes it just may be a statement. We had an issue recently. We didn't issue a statement in the school system, but what we did do was make individuals available for interviews. And we even went so far to think about, where do we host these interviews? Are they in an office where you have nothing but a wall of books behind, or is this individual going to be positioned in the hallway where students are coming through, and I have this person on the move, kind of like what you would see in a 60 Minutes interview? So whether you're planning for a meeting, a media interview, or any kind of opportunity, think about, what do you want the outcomes to be? And from that point, backwards map. What do you need to do to get you there? Maybe it's an op-ed. Maybe it's a town hall meeting with parents. Maybe it's helping the school, your child's school, promote its key messages from your vantage point. So if there is a challenge about the quality of your child's schooling, what things can your organization do to assist that school in promoting its key messages from your vantage point? You, as parents, provide a wonderful third-party endorsement. And while some people may question, of course the school system says this information is this way, but we all know that we take our best recommendations from our friends, families, and neighbors. and that's what you are as members of the PTA, your friends, families, and neighbors. And so you can provide a wonderful third-party endorsement for your school, or in some cases your school district, about initiatives or challenges that they may have. So I challenge you not just to look at how do we promote those activities that we have in our association, but how can we work to partner with our school and with our school district to align our messages to the things that our school and our school district thinks are important. So if you are connected to a school system that has a public relations person, fantastic. Reach out to them and ask, what can we do to help? Because I'm sure they would love to have established that relationship if it's not already established. If you don't have one, then work with your principal and find out from your principal what are the things that you think are important for folks to know about our school or our school system, and how can I help you spread that word. From that point, you should be able to get pretty far down the path in making and communicating those key points to your stakeholders.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Carla. We now have some time that we can address any questions that you may have. I did see a couple of questions or comments in the question box about having some trouble accessing the handout, and I'm sorry for the trouble with that. The handout is the presentation slide, and I will try to upload it again to the system, and I also can email it out to everyone who participated in the call, so I'll be sure that everyone receives a copy of it, and I apologize for the error message that's being received from the handout. If you have any questions that you would like to ask or would love even just some more advice or tips, feel free to type that in the question box, and we're happy to address those. I did see one question about if there are any case studies where a situation of a crisis was successfully handled, like a theft or personal conflicts or harassment. And so I wanted to open it up to Carla and Leslie to see if you might have any case studies that you might want to share where, let's say, within your own district of something that was handled very well, or even Carla, from your perspective, that any case studies that you might have to share.
I'm trying to think about this. Just last week, in our state, in the state of Alabama, the legislature created a mechanism to kind of rank schools. And so if schools test in a certain way, there is a bottom 6%, and there is something that the legislature has termed the failing schools list. And unfortunately, we had a school that made that list, and so we wanted to implement a communication strategy to talk about the positives of that school, what's going on, and why that school is more than just a number. So we didn't issue a statement from the school district, but what we did do was make that principal available to talk about those great things that are happening in the school, and we introduced reporters to students who had earned, one student in particular who had earned over $1.8 million in scholarships, and it's only February. So that school has a story, and we wanted people to know that that story wasn't a numbers story. It's a person story. It's a heart story, and we wanted to connect people to that. And then we followed that up by having the principal write an op-ed, and he did a beautiful op-ed piece. And I was actually looking at the metrics on that. We just kind of shared it on a Sunday morning or mid-Sunday when the op-ed came out. And within a very short amount of time, I'm going to look right now, when I last looked, I think it had been shared 89 times and had received lots of comments. But when I started looking at the engagement on it to see how many people had connected with it, I think it had engagement of about 9,000 people, so in a very short amount of time. And of course, when people saw those messages and read the op-ed, they would append on it as they shared or retweeted that about what they thought about it. So taking the message straight to the people can work in your favor, and it is a tool that you have at your discretion. I was challenged by a reporter one time. He said, "I think you're going around me." And I said, "Well, I probably am. I have 10,000 email addresses and phone numbers, and so that's a great opportunity for our school system to tell our story to our families." And so the tables have turned a little bit, I think, as far as public relations and the media, and I think everybody's trying to figure out the new landscape, but it's a real opportunity to take your message straight to your stakeholders without having to go through a filter if you're able to use social media in a very effective manner.
And
I think you're right, Leslie, because often also the media, there's not as many people. So there's just not as many people covering it for professional organizations. You have people on the fly, bloggers, people are just writing, WordPress blogs on, on any opinion. So really, you're going to be doing that more often because there's just fewer people covering it. And also you have to realize, whereas when I started in my career, we were dedicated to our beat for longer periods of time. So we were able to develop these better relationships with our sources on these beats. Reporters are coming in maybe a couple years at the most, and also they might be covering multiple topics. So they might be covering cops 2 days, police 1 day, schools 1 day. They just don't have that same sense of relationship with the community. So depending on where you are, you really have to understand that these folks are coming in and out, and they might just be covering a ton of topics, and so they can't really dedicate the time to develop a relationship that you can kind of count on they're going to be there to cover the entire story.
Thank you, Carla. And Leslie, there was a follow-up question in regard to the op-ed that you mentioned. The question is, where was the op-ed posted? Was it on social media or on a blog?
No, because I have a relationship with our local newspaper, I know the timelines for publication. And so if you would like to submit an op-ed, it's 800 words or less by Wednesday at noon. So knowing that little piece of information, Heidi May talked about getting to know the deadlines and the people, the key players for your local newspaper. Knowing that information and knowing that lots of newsrooms now have challenges in filling content because there's not enough staff. I mean, if it's a well-written, a well-crafted op-ed, I think it'll be hard for us to not find placement in the paper. And I work and live in a community that cares about education. This is where the University of Alabama is, so there's heavy commitment and interest in schools and education, so that's a good thing, and that works in our benefit. So the article, the op-ed, was published on Sunday in the Tuscaloosa newspaper, and then we shared that on our Facebook page, and then we retweeted and tweeted that from our Twitter account. As I told you earlier, most of our followers on Facebook are parents, and so that provides a third-party endorsement as they reshare information and content that they find online and share it with their friends and family about what's going on with our school system. So it appeared in the hard copy paper, but where it really took off was on social media.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. And in regard to the question about case studies of nonprofits or PTA when successfully handling a crisis like theft or a personal conflict, I'll just add to that I would say those successfully handled ones are really when it's been less is more. Again, in those sorts of situations, you don't want to comment on any investigation that is taking place. Those sort of details should be left up to the police and to the authorities. You don't want to comment on a personal conflict or something happening with a particular person. It's just sticking to your overall message of we can't comment on that, but what we can tell you is that we're here to support schools across the state and families and kids, and just reiterating those key messages. So I think when I have seen it where it has been successfully handled, it's just sticking to those basic messages and just reiterating those key messages of what the good work that PTA is doing and not commenting on the actual investigation or those particular cases.
If I could just add for a second, a lot of times when you guys are asking for case studies, and while they exist, the really good ones, the really successful ones, don't really turn into a quote-unquote case study unless you can get someone to peel back the layers of the onion. You just never know they existed or happened in the first place because it kind of happens very seamlessly. So if you have an unfortunate story that you would like to minimize, the best thing that can happen is that there's not much media coverage. It doesn't linger for days. That's a good day for me as a public relations practitioner, and if I have unfortunate news that I'm hoping doesn't stay on the front page for a very long time. And so for those reasons, that may be why you wouldn't issue a statement. You may do some other strategies, implement some other strategies to still communicate with your stakeholders your position. So they do exist. I can tell you once I was researching case studies to talk about crisis communication, and I was on the FEMA website and found our situation with the tornado in 2011 cited in their research as part of a case study. So where you're going to go to look if you're interested in those types of things is what type of school public relations issue do you want to address? Is it a crisis situation that maybe involves weather or some sort of crisis that just pops up? I'd probably go to FEMA. There are other statistics or other entities that you can look at, but it's all going to depend on the type of situation you're looking for.
I think in my case, I've covered a lot of different kinds of crisis situations in schools, and I think the ones that are where the outcome is, I don't know if you want to say positive, but at least that it's handled, I would think, professionally, is that the people involved in the situation actually acknowledge whatever the challenge is, whether it's wrongdoing, a mistake, a conflict, that they actually acknowledge that this conflict exists. So if there's a lot of, oh, well, no, that's not really happening, or ignoring the situation, it's going to continue going on and on because the reporters are going to say, well, no, there is something going on here because we're going to continue to report about it. So it's almost like if you admit the wrongdoing or acknowledge that there's an investigation, you talk about that our lawyers are looking into it, or we're going to take steps so this doesn't happen again. That kind of thing resolves it more quickly. If all parties involved are willing to at least say, this happened, this is what we're going to do to resolve it, we're going to make sure that these steps are taken, this is how we're going to apologize to maybe the wrong people, whatever the situation is, that's usually when I've covered stories that have gone, I don't know if you want to say smoothly, but been handled professionally. It's when people don't ignore that the problem exists in the first place. When that happens, that's when you're going to have the story linger for days in the media because they're going to continue to dig to find out, well, there is something wrong because people are upset or there is a lawsuit. So if you're going to try to kind of wish it away, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I think that's kind of, if you're looking for a case study, I've done many stories about school takeovers or the parent trigger law here in California. When people are trying to ignore that the parents are upset about how the school is being run, that's when you end up on the front page for a really long time. When you acknowledge that there's an issue and that you're going to try to resolve it, it's not going to be on the front page as long. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, what she's talking about is transparency, and so that's, be as transparent as you can. If you can't answer right now, then state that. I can't answer right now, but here's what I can tell you. That goes back to bridging that Heidi May talked about, and all of what we've talked about in the last couple of minutes is the point that I talked about earlier. ACE, you acknowledge the issue. That's just what Carla said. You're going to show compassion. If compassion is needed to be shown on that particular issue, then you show that, and then explain how you're addressing those issues. So very simple and succinct ways to be very transparent by acknowledging and showing compassion and explaining how you're addressing those issues. It goes a long way in building credit with your stakeholders and also the media.
Thank you, Leslie and Carla. Well, this concludes our webinar for this evening. A special thanks to Carla and Leslie for their time and for sharing their insights and expertise. And thank you to all of you for your time and participation. If we can assist in any way, please feel free to reach out to me at any time at the contact information that is noted on the slide. Our next webinar in this series will be held on Monday, March 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The webinar will be on how to use Google for nonprofits. Please watch for more information. We hope that you will be able to join us. Thank you again for your time and participation, and thanks so much to Carla and Leslie for being a part of this as well. Good night.